Hello, how you doing? Good to see you. Welcome. I don't know where Sean is. He hasn't turned up yet. I assume I'm working and you can hear me. Hi Fiona. Hi Alison. I'll go through the comments in a moment. I expect he'll jump in a minute and be like, "I'm there," and he's got the time wrong or something. Maybe, maybe he's forgotten completely. In which case, you've got me solo bonus. Hello, how are you? It's lovely to be able to see you. I hope you are well, as you may have turned up thinking that Sean Campbell, thriller author extraordinaire, ex-barrister, was here to talk about his characters. I don't need these in if no one's here to talk to. But so far, he's not. I've just emailed him panically and sent him a message on Facebook saying, "Where are you, mate? I'm waiting for you." But he's not appeared. He might have the time wrong, which is funny because I think he's London based, isn't he? So he's not got the excuse of being, somewhere 12 hours ahead or behind. But that's okay. It's nice to be able to have a quick conversation with you anyway. Yeah. Well, I hadn't obviously prepared anything because I didn't know I would be on my own. But there we go. It'll be nice all the same. I'm gonna have my beer all the same though. Here's what I've got. A best bitter from a local, the Pheasantry Brewery in Nottingham, very close to me. Nice local beer, so that'll be a nice way to spend a few minutes all the same. And if Sean turns up, that's amazing. If he doesn't, no worries. It'll be nice to have a catch up with you. I'll pour this to start with, though. I assume you can hear me all well and everything's coming through as it should be. Let me know. I'm going to keep my emails open on here just in case we've got technical issues, which is causing this. I don't know. Here he is. Here he is. Hello, mate.
Sorry, I had some tech difficulties there.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Normally, I'd do like an introduction before and we'd have like a talking about what's happening, but because we're a couple of minutes running behind, I just went live before you joined me, but right. There we are. You're all good. Where are you today, Sean?
North London.
Okay.
So just at home near the Ali Pali.
Oh, very nice. I like it up there. Yeah, a nice part of the city. Yeah. Oh, you're dropping in and out a little bit with me.
Oh, sorry. Thanks. Are we still all right?
I think so. We'll push on. It may even be me that's causing the issue. I don't know.
It's probably me.
Connection's fairly good. It says it's all right. We'll see. We're professionals. We'll make it up as we go along. It'll be fine.
Exactly. Let's bluff it.
Yeah. So today, I was excited to talk to you, Sean, for lots of reasons. I've never met you before, which is always nice to connect with a new author. But I've called this conversation "Getting Away with Murder" or something to that end, because that used to be you moved from that being one part of your bread and butter to it being another part of your bread and butter, as
exactly.
it were.
I used to tell lies for a living, and now I write them down, and they're a bit longer.
Talk me through that. What does that involve for people that don't know who you are?
Okay,
or what
I went to bar school and law school, which basically means you learn how to argue in ridiculously convoluted ways, and you try and work out in criminal law. And I've never practiced criminal law, I should say, to be fair. So if I get it wrong, I apologise. But criminal law, essentially, what you're trying to do is legally you're obliged not to tell any lies, but the truth is always from like a certain point of view. And one of the things they try and teach you is to work out your case theory. So you're presented with all these facts, the things that your client's admitted to, the things the police can prove, and you've got to try and work out what the least damaging story you can concoct from all of those facts is. So if your client has admitted things, you can't lie on their behalf because that's considered misleading the court, but you can certainly reframe things in a way that makes it less damaging. So
yes,
your classic, why did you steal? If you stole to feed someone, it's someone under pressure, and you're probably going to plead that in mitigation. You're probably going to say guilty, but it's all about trying to work out what the limits of the law allow you to do. You stretch things as far as possible. And I think the same is true with storytelling. That the best crime novels, you start with a story, and then by the end, it's been reframed and twisted, and you sort of move with the story. That you think you're looking at one story, and then it's not. It's a completely different perspective. Or you've got a narrator who's unreliable, and actually they've been telling you porkies since the beginning, like The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And it's just beautiful how you can sort of take things at a completely different angle.
I really like that, and I love the way you've explained that, because actually you're right. You're completely right. Is that all I suppose you're trying to do in a court case is understand the story behind
Exactly.
what led to, that person having whatever found in their car in the dead of night. What is the story behind that thing being there?
Have a crowbar and be out there at 3 a.m.
Exactly, with a load of stolen TVs.
Exactly. I mean, if you wanted to take an interesting story, you might be like, right, you have the intersection of two crimes, and you find somebody stopped at traffic lights because he's been speeding, and it turns out he's got a car boot. The police open the car boot, they find a dead body. Presumably, you'd think that guy is the murderer. But what if actually the murderer had killed someone, put the body in the boot, left it in a high crime area, and then waited for someone else to steal it? And the guy that was stopped by the police was, in fact, just the carjacker who'd nicked it and was driving on a joyride and didn't realise there was a body in the boot. I mean, I think that would be a great crime novel to write.
It would. I like that. Is that one you've written already? Is that the next one?
You nick it. It's fine.
Yeah. So when were you, have you left the law world now then?
So I actually became a carer for my mum, and so I went to look after her, which meant I was using none of my lying legal training. So someone bet me I couldn't write a book, and I'm unreasonably competitive. So rather than saying I could write a book, I said not only could I write a book, that I'd write it, edit it, and publish it in 90 days. And then when I said 90 days, I was like, that's quite a long time, isn't it? It sounds good.
Yeah. Really I don't think I could do that now, and I've done 10.
The first one as well. But part of the beauty of the first one is you don't know when you're doing it completely wrong. You can make shit up completely, go completely off piste, and write a story that does not follow the right structure. And you kind of get away with it because it's your first book. Except when you do it really, really quickly, and in the end, write in 23 days from starting with a blank page through to publishing it on Amazon. And then rather than just being like a few people who thought they'd check whether you did in fact write a book and therefore whether you've won the bet or not, it goes viral. And by the end of the year, 60-odd thousand people have downloaded it. And everyone's criticizing the book you wrote in 3 weeks, saying it's not very good. And then 10 years later, it's still your first book and people are still downloading it. And it's a bit of a nightmare.
Oh, my days.
It's not you've been... book, I'll be honest with you. But,
So you've been doing this for 10 years?
Yeah, 10 years in May.
Wow. And how many books have you written in that time then?
Well, 10.
So you've done one a year? Yeah.
My second one took me nearly 2 years, so it sort of averaged out.
Let's hope the second... I mean, you'd think maybe the second one's better, but I think sometimes there's an argument to just doing something quickly does produce a good result to an extent, because thriller
vibe.
Yes, exactly. You're not agonising over details that are irrelevant, are you? Or won't be picked up
it's so frantic in the writing. You feel like I'm rushing to find out what's happening as much as you are. And that energy sort of comes through in the page, and you end up with just bang, 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 action. But you also might end up with a cast of far too many people, and you've got subplots that sort of don't quite tie themselves off. And because I was a bit amateurish in that one, and I've carried off lots of subplots that have slightly dangled throughout the series. I'm now writing a spin-off to the series that is intended to tie them all up. But that means I now need to make sure I tie up every loose end in every book, and every little detail I've thrown in off the cuff is now going to be a plot point. So it's not just a Ukrainian gangster in book one, but the Ukrainian gangster was part of a syndicate that is now trying to take over, and suddenly it's Chekhov's gun.
Oh, I see. So you're taking bits from previous stories and trying to make them almost like a spin-off, their own story in a future.
So it's again like the case theory argument, that you take the little bits that you kind of stuck with because your clients admitted to them, / you wrote them, and then you try and turn it into a new story.
I like that idea. Yeah. And there are always so many of those little those little bits that fly off when you're writing, aren't there? Like, because you can't follow all of the characters. It's not possible. Well, you could, but it would be such a long and arduous process that you've really got to, particularly for a thriller, you've got to sort of stay very tightly focused, haven't you, on those protagonists?
Well, exactly. You expect it to be that the author should know everything about their series and everything they've ever written. But I don't know about you, but I forget stuff all the time. I'm like, what did I write? what number house was that? What was the character's middle name? And you're sort of tempted to blur it, especially when you do more than one series, or you've got standalones, and you what one was with that character, what was with that series, and you want to take all the best bits and put them back together, and then you're like, oh no, I didn't put that character in, and you have to sort of work around it. So the book I mentioned, I had three brothers who were in a gang, and two of them were arrested and one fled. So of course, readers are like, well, what happened to that guy? And I get multiple emails every year, just saying, well, where is he now? What is it every year? I suppose. And so I want to tell that story. Where did he go? Because if your gangster disappears, you don't stop committing crime. You don't stop being a gang boss. Presumably, you've got some resources, but they're not going to be infinite. And obviously, this is written at the time of Schengen. So if you manage to make it to France, you could probably imagine him disappearing from there. But you're a gangster in hiding. What do you do? And what happens to the power structure you've left behind? Because if you set up this massive criminal underworld that is the police are constantly fighting with, and then suddenly you abandon the criminal overlord who's just disappeared in book one, readers want to know what happens. You can't just.
That's interesting, isn't it?
It
is. I mean, there is always an element, though, I think, of you can't follow every little sort of passageway, because it would just become there's other stories to be told, isn't there? And you're always getting these new ideas that you'd rather tell than the gangster that fled in book one. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but there might be one that you think, oh, I'd rather talk about this character, or I'd rather talk about this one.
I try and sort of merge them. So the one I'm writing in the minute, I've always been fascinated by witness protection. And if you disappear into witness protection, what happens? And you've got people who are genuinely victims who go into witness protection. And those people you can sort of sympathize with. Because their entire lives uprooted. Like if you and I had to disappear tonight and we had none of our stuff, none of our people, we had to assume a new name, and we couldn't do any of the stuff we love doing because it ties back to us. It's a bit like that TV show Hunted. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yeah, I love that program.
Always got a drawback to their life. They want to see their kids. They want to see their wife. They want to go motorbike.
And you're like, don't phone, because they always get caught. Yeah, and they always try. They're like, well, I'm going to leave a message under a stone in the garden.
Exactly.
No, don't do it.
A few weeks for a TV show. Can you imagine being on the run for the rest of your life and never being able to speak to those people again?
Yeah.
So the flip side of that, if you look at like the United States, they've disappeared a lot of mobsters because in order to break omerta and the code of silence among mobsters, they had to turn some of them. And the best way to do that was to offer them guaranteed safe passage. So they take these gangsters, some of them torturers, murderers, money launderers, all these people who've done horrendous things, and they pick them up and they drop them in tiny, unsuspecting communities all over the United States. And those people then have to stay away from a life of crime. They have to stay away from everything they've ever known, and inevitably some of them slip. So what I want to look at is what's happened to all the people in the gang that have gone into witness protection, and how could they be caught? So the first one I'm doing, he moved into witness protection with his wife, but what happens when your relationship breaks down after you go into witness protection? Because your wife, who's found it all stressful, maybe she didn't love you that much in the first place, she's now pissed off and is going home or wants to go home. She wants to see her family.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that in witness protection? Or what if someone really loves a certain sport and has to go and see Arsenal play, and therefore they will go to an Arsenal match eventually? There's always going to be something that ties you back to your former life. And so I wanted to sort of juxtapose that with the former gang and look at it from the perspective of a vigilante hunting these people down by trying to use all the details about their past life, while the gangster lord is at large, and eventually being a police versus vigilante chase to find the big boss who's fled, using the clues from the witness protection identities to give sort of quite an interesting structure.
Yeah, I like it.
I mean, I've never seen anything like that done. So
no, but you make a lot of interesting points there, I think, and I think a lot of writers, myself included, we show the event that causes something. We don't often explore all of the repercussions of that event, just because we haven't got the bandwidth to do that in that much detail, But actually, what you're talking about there is the, you might. What I'm saying is a different crime thriller might be that court case, those gangsters getting caught, those gangsters facing whatever judgment they face. You're saying 5 years on, what's happening,
Exactly.
you know, and that's a different story, but a very interesting one all the same.
There's some really good gangster courtroom thrillers. I mean, Grisham's done a couple which have involved witness intimidation, juries being sequestered, but all that has been done quite a few times. So in order to try and take a fresh perspective on it, I want to say, what's happened to the victims 5 years on? What's happened to the gangsters 5 years on? How does that interact with the power structure that would be left behind? Is there a power vacuum? Does another gang move in? And how does that sort of serious organised crime work intersect with what the police do on a day-to-day basis? And there's a nice blurring between murder investigation and organised crime. And so
absolutely. Yeah.
How does that split up on an organisational level?
So this is the book you're writing currently?
At the moment, yeah.
Yeah. And this will be the 11th then in the series.
Going to be essentially a spin-off, because I'm focusing on one of the junior detectives from my original series and spinning it off. So she's doing most of this investigation, but with all the returning cast people love.
Ah, lovely. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's have a quick look on the comments and see who's joining us. Steve Moore says it's an impressive Amazon page you've got.
Cheers.
He's obviously Googled you. Alison is here. She says, hi, Luke and Sean. She can hear us as well, which is amazing. Ray has recommended that we have some background music at the start. I'm sorry, Ray. I haven't got that technical yet. It's just silence. I think that's the best thing, you know, anticipation until
wait for me to turn up
until we arrive.
Like a mad dash as I was running across my living room to sit in the chair.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And then Fiona's here as well, which is great. She says, hi, Steve. I think she's probably said hello to us somewhere, but I can't find the message. But there we are. So tell me then about your main character is a police detective. Rather than like someone who works in the court. Why did you choose to go out of what you knew at that time?
There's a hell of a lot more flexibility in having a police detective, because you can tell the entire story. The law and order side of things tends to get involved much later on, once you've already got the criminal and you want to bring them to justice, which allows you to tell that snapshot from arrest through to conviction or exoneration. But the police are investigating everything that doesn't get solved, doesn't get proved. And so I think there's a bigger perspective to see there, that it's interesting to see how they interact with the victims, how they interact with the evidence, how they interact with the teams, all the budget stuff. I mean, there's some very boring minutiae that needs to be put in accurately, but also interestingly. So often you'll see that my boss is a dick trope, where there's always a senior officer who is a complete arser. And that is like the easy way to show the conflict within the police. But
go on, sorry.
I was going to say, what if that doesn't happen? What if actually the leader of the murder investigation team is actually quite affable? Because most policemen are. I mean, I've met a few, and most DCIs, really nice guys, really intelligent, down to earth. They know their stuff. They don't get to DCI without being very good at what they're doing. And I think it's quite nice to have a non-broken home detective who is just vaguely competent, who isn't an alcoholic, who isn't taking money on the side. And you can focus on the crime being the investigation rather than his relationship with his wife, his children, etc.
I think that's an interesting point you make there, because a lot of those classic detective stories are this lone wolf, basically, who lives on the outside of the world, and they're great stories. I'm not saying they're bad, but that's quite a common trope, isn't it, in the genre?
Well, exactly. In a murder investigation team, you're looking at 36 people plus all the supporting forensic scientists. If you sit in a murder investigation room, incident room where they're doing an investigation, it's so many people crowded in there. And sometimes on like Silent Witness, you'll see all the people crowded around a big table, and that's vaguely indicative of it. But it's so much paperwork, so much evidence logging, so much budgeting, so many things go into it. And most of that is not interesting enough to be part of a novel, and you have to sort of take it with a pinch of salt. But occasionally you want to go, well, what if they don't get the budget allocated? What happens to a crime that isn't properly investigated? What if it is miscategorized as a missing persons? And you can sort of play with that to turn the mundane into something more sinister, more thrilling.
Yeah. So obviously in your previous job, you would have understood part of this. You'd have got a slice of this, at the end when something goes to trial. But there must have been quite a research process when you sat down to write about maybe not that first one that took you 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but maybe the one that took you 2 years. There must have been quite a research process to actually think, right, well, it's a 36 person team. Who are these people? Where did they come from? What are their roles? You know, what?
And it changes as well so much. I mean, people who are now crime scene investigators, the US term that we've sort of appropriated, used to be senior crime officers. And the Met's been reorganised several times, and the way the Met is set up is not the same way the rest of the UK police set up is. So in the UK, in London, you've got DCIs leading murder investigation teams, but the rest of the UK, it's usually a DI. So if you've got someone who's a police officer looks at the Met but didn't realise it's slightly different, they might think you've done it wrong. So you've got to be incredibly on it. Thankfully, the College of Policing put a lot of their manuals online, so you can actually read the procedure that they use and the processes they follow, which I also think is an interesting plot point, because what if a criminal did that? If I was a murderer and I wanted to kill someone, I might look at how the police was going to respond, work out what their response would be, and work out how I can make sure it falls in the grey zone. So there's no body. There we go. It's probably a missing persons to start with. So if you're a criminal and you look at what the police are doing, you can subvert it. You know, if you know that the standard thing is to dust for prints, you wear gloves. If you know that the hair, you're going to wear a skin-tight suit over you so that you're not dropping skin cells all over the place. And those sort of forensically aware criminals are scary. And
but you also see this with some quite high-profile killers that purposefully travel to different parts of the country to do it, because they know that then it's a different police force will be investigating the crime separately for a time. I'm sure at some point when they realise it's the same person, they put some kind of task force together. But you know,
it's geographic profiling, which looks at a series of events, because people tend to commit their first offence close to home, and then they slowly spiral out away and further, because people tend to have a comfort zone. So criminals included, that they'll go, well, if I live in North London, I might kill someone in Muswell Hill. Whereas if you're from Southwark, you're probably going to kill somewhere around Lambeth, Southwark, that end of town. At least for your first offence. So sometimes the most recent cases that are investigated now are the most difficult, but if you can work your way backwards in the chain to find a serial killer's earliest offences, you can find the places where they made mistakes. So even if they're not making mistakes today, they might have made a mistake 10 years ago. And so sometimes it's just waiting for the mistake to happen.
Fascinating stuff. Really is fascinating. And as you say, this could go on 10 years. You know, that's mad.
Done after 40 years with DNA.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? That's true. But I suppose they're not active that whole time. They might have killed someone 40 years ago and just be living their life.
Some of them are. Some of them will go to prison and not be active for 15 years while they're in for a robbery
for something
or whatever,
else.
And then they come out and they commit again. A lot of them are compulsive. They don't have any control. So these really rare psychopaths who are totally self-controlled, who know what they're doing, who plan, are incredibly rare. And the people that can be forensically aware, patient, and disrupt the pattern by waiting years between kills, those are the hardest to catch. And the ones that are doing it for very dispassionate reasons, rather than religious compulsive murderers, rather than violent psychopaths, rather than those with testosterone issues, rather than those with broken homes, the more sophisticated you get, the harder it is to find them, and the harder it is to catch them, and even harder still to convict them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of
difficulty is fascinating.
That's what you're talking about there, is the sort of thing you see on programs like Line of Duty and Luther and those sorts of things, where it is a really hard-boiled psychopath who's got all these sorts of very, very clever, and it almost becomes like a battle of wits, doesn't it, between the detectives and the perpetrator, who can outsmart the other one, In
the same way, it's the battle of the wits between the reader and the writer, because the writer has got to give all the clues to be able to solve the case in a way that's fair, but at the same time, you don't want the reader to work it out. And sometimes you want to mesh up the perspectives, sometimes you want to give slightly misleading information, but at the same time, it's got to be reasonable that you could work it out, because you want someone to be able to read the book a second time and go, oh yeah, of course, it had to be that. Surprising, but inevitable in the end.
That's interesting then. So you follow I've unfortunately not read one of your books, but I've got one on my Kindle ready to go. So you do follow that sort of classic mystery trope where the actual perpetrator is in the story. You know, they are mentioned, and you've got like 5 or 6 possible people that it could be.
Often quite a lot more. I don't necessarily give a great deal of screen time to the killer early on. But if you're paying attention, they are there. And actually, I have put the killer in the title a couple of times, which people don't often notice until the end, which I always find
He did it. There's a picture of him.
Exactly. He's on the cover. It's that guy.
Yeah.
Then it becomes not just a who did it, but a how did it and why did it done it. So it's not any one of the like who, what, where, why, when can be compulsive. So I've done a guy who got murdered by 3 different people in one night. That was a fun victim, and trying to work out which of the murderers who all had a reasonable plan actually killed him and when. That's different.
Oh, right.
I had one very psychopathic serial killer who used ball bearings and an MRI machine to murder someone. Death by doctor, one of the most unusual murders in there. I really hope no one copies any of these. I mean, that would be horrendous, wouldn't it?
That would be. It'd make a right mess.
It knocked someone out in an alleyway with a brick while they were unconscious, put more ball bearings inside them, took them to hospital, the edge of the CCTV, waited till the paramedics came over, said he'd hit his head. Paramedics take him inside because of a head injury. They have to put him in an MRI machine to check he's not concussed. As soon as they do, ball bearings inside.
Oh,
victim is a million pieces. I mean, how the fuck do you investigate that?
I know.
You've got a victim.
Start with a mop and bucket, I imagine. Yeah.
If you can catch that guy, you can catch anyone.
That's crazy. Love it. What great ideas. Well, that's a point then. Where do these ideas come from? Do you start with the victim? Do you start with the perpetrator? Do you start with that? I can imagine that one was right. That would be a great way to kill someone. I want that to be the basis of this book. You know.
Well, that one came part of the way through from a friend of mine who suggested it. He's medically trained, legally trained, and worked in the police, so a bit of an interesting guy. And he suggested that one. I thought I've got to vote that. I can't not use that idea. But so it's different for different books. So one of the books I wrote with The Evolution of a Serial Killer, one of my favourites. The idea was policeman is a serial killer. He goes to police training and learns how to get away with it, basically. And in that one, Morton has been put on sort of disciplinary, and he's training the next generation of detectives. So he's out of active investigation duty. He's annoyed. He wants back in. The boss doesn't think he's fit. So a little bit of the tropey boss is a pain in the ass story going on there.
Yeah.
And then he's got an entire class full of detectives, and he sets them the challenge: how would you kill someone? Tell me your idea of the perfect murder. And each week, one of them pitches the perfect murder, and he tells them how he catch them. Unfortunately, one of his students is a serial killer who takes those ideas, takes his way of catching them, and then uses that to come up with the absolute perfect murder in their book. So it's the ultimate wits of the victim, of the killer versus the police, because he's literally got to hunt someone who is using his own strategies.
Yes, but he knows who this person is, in theory, if he can catch them.
But which?
Yeah.
He's got to find out. And of course, he goes to the boss with this and says, "There's a serial killer in my classroom," and she says, "No, there's not. You're just making crap up in order to get back in active duty." So he's got to try and do some of this without the resources he would have if he were able to commandeer them. And so he's got this constant tug of war between the resources he needs and the resources he's got, while he's investigating a serial killer who is smarter than he is.
I mean, that seems to be a great trope that I love in the sort of books you're describing, where there's something really appealing about the detective that goes off piste, that throws the rule book out of the window and gives the person a bit of rough justice and gives them what we all wish we could. You know what I mean? Like, how far do you do that, or how far do you sort of stick with the procedure?
Because I like to see detectives stay within the law, but occasionally you need to push things. And I have sort of strayed a bit in terms of subgenre throughout the series. That I started writing what was probably a straight thriller with crime elements to, strongly criminal thriller, lots of murder going on. And the procedure just sort of happened because I was trying to be accurate. And then from there, because the lead detective who recurred was a detective, it sort of moved more into the police framework. But I like pushing the boundaries a bit occasionally and doing things differently. And sometimes you have to have the guy who goes beyond the rules. But I like to have a good reason he's done it, rather than just being he's a complete maverick. It's not Luther who's just like, right, I'm going to do what I like. He's not Reacher who drops into a story and starts whacking people with it in a sort of really violent way. But at the same time, you want to see him match wits and law and order to prevail in the end.
Yeah. There's, as you say, it's a balance, isn't it, with all sorts of things. Obviously, most of us don't know police procedure. In fact, I'd say that most people's police procedure comes from reading books and watching TV. Some of us are unlucky enough maybe to have been at the wrong end of it. Some of us maybe have been at the prosecuting end of it, whatever, I don't know. But that's probably 90% is from reading books and watching TV. So I suppose with that, you get a fair bit of leeway. Yeah. Do you ever get people who are more knowledgeable than you in certain areas saying, "No, mate, that wouldn't
Yes.
happen,"
I mean, read the
or
reviews, you'll find more than a few of them. So I sort of aim for verisimilitude. I want it to be reasonably believable, but if you're an expert, you're going to know better than me most of the time. I mean, I do try and consult with experts, so I will talk to DCIs, I'll talk to forensic scientists, I'll talk to anyone that I think I need to for a specific plot point. So if I'm using teeth for a DNA analysis, I'll talk to a forensic odontologist. And if I'm talking to someone for, a psychiatrist role, I'll find a psychiatrist and try and make it reasonably realistic. I want you to not be able to disprove me with a quick Google, basically. If you look it up and first page of Google doesn't have something that contradicts me, it's probably good enough that most people won't care. And at the end of the day, we're talking about an ebook that's a couple of quid. We're not talking about, a guide to committing murder that is perfect. And I mean, I don't actually want to give you completely the way to get away with killing someone. That would not be great. I think I might get expelled from that.
No, not that it matters now, because you're not practicing,
Exactly. I mean, to be fair though, if you get to stay a member of the Inns of Court, even if you've never done it, so you stay with your inn for the rest of your life, and you're a member, and you can go and have a really nice subsidised lunch. So,
cool, right? So you can
benefit to a legal education, right?
Yeah, well, gotta be. It's got a difficult and expensive process. So
private bar as well. But, yeah.
Oh, lovely. Yeah,
I'm not mentioning it. Do not go to Cleaver Square, go to the building on the left and go up the stairs. There's not a private bar there.
Sounds great. Sounds perfect. Sounds like an ideal day out. Let's do it. Next time I'm in London, I'm calling you up, Sean, and we'll go. Absolutely. A question from Ray, which I like, which I'm interested in. But I'm going to take this a little bit further. He asks, though, after you've completed a book manuscript, how do you prefer to get it print ready? Hire an outside editor, proofreader, get your friends to do it yourself, etc. But I want to know, further than that, what is your process from the idea to it's on the shelves for us to buy? How does that process come to you? Because every author I've spoken to, it's been different, and I'm fascinated by it.
I like to have an idea of the beginning and the end from the off. I want to know where I'm going, and then it's the bit in the middle that I always find most complicated. I tend to paint myself into a corner, because when you write a really clever criminal, they are by definition really hard to catch. And so I'll often write like 2/3 of the story and then find, how the hell do I catch this guy, and have to tweak things in order to make it possible.
He hands himself in. It was me, Gov.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a developmental editor who sort of checks that I'm not going completely mad, and she reads each chapter as I write it, gives me a bit of feedback, and then I sort of feed that back into how I'm writing the next chapter. I've got a bunch of beta readers who read the entire thing just for story purposes towards the end. And a couple of authors who read it for me and I read their stuff, the general sort of tit for tat feedback. And then once I've got a manuscript that's in reasonably good shape, I've got 2 copy editors, I've got a couple of proofreaders, and I've got a typesetter. And of course, everything goes back and forth to multiple advanced readers. The review copies go out. So by the end of it, it's probably been read 30 or 40 times by 15 or 16 people, and it's very iterative. And if you find there's a typo in a review copy, it's probably not there by the time it goes to press, because I would have done another proofread after that point. But if you tell me about it, I'll make sure it's not and say thank you. But most of the time, people tell me about it and it's already been fixed. But it's nice to know. Because you don't expect to get every typo with one pass. I think the standard that the Society of Editors and Proofreaders, SFEP, say is 95% of errors get caught with each pass. So the first pass will get 95%, and then of what's left, 95% with the second pass. So after 2 passes, I think most stuff's in good shape. There's lots of stuff that's stylistic, as you'll know. You put your together your Bible and you want to keep all your series consistent, and you've got your style guide, so you're trying to decide how each thing's done and whether you italicize internal thoughts, whether you want to use single or double quotes here. It's lots of little bits, and you try and make sure it matches. And sometimes you want your editors to read all the previous stuff as well to make sure you're carrying it back across. It's a big ask, and it's expensive, and obviously you have to be commercially proportionate with these things.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is a line, isn't there? It's like you get to a point and you're like, right, that's great. That. And ultimately it's the story, isn't it? That's what we're here to do, is to sell brilliant stories that people want to keep reading, and offer escapism and offer all of the things that stories do. So, I mean, a couple of spelling errors. Yeah. I think sometimes also, from what you've said, I sometimes wait till I've got 2 or 3, I think. If someone messages me, if a book's been out for a while, I'm like, all right, I'll save that, and when I've got a couple, I'll go in and do them all.
Perspective as well, isn't it? It's what people think is an error and what people think's not. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I got rather raked over the coals in a major Facebook group, as some of your viewers may know, a couple of weeks ago, that someone took objection to how I'd referred to a character as old. And I read the post and I thought, oh, crap, I must have messed up here. So, of course, I naturally reopened the book and look at it. And the reference to it being old is in one perspective from a character, and that character sees the victim who's got cancer and is about to die, and they look old in their opinion, and they say old lady to another character in speech. So it's not me saying she's an old lady.
Yeah.
And then in the next chapter, it's revealed that she was, in fact, in her late 50s. And of course, someone had equated the two and decided that meant I have decided everybody over 55 is old, which is a spectrum, isn't it? But unfortunately, that happens. And I had several angry emails, and a couple of people were calling for a boycott because I'd said that. And of course, because one person had misrepresented the 55 as Sean thinks everyone over 55 is old and should be, fed back into the machine of life to.
That is taking things a little bit too far, isn't it?
When you stick that in a book that's been out for 6 years, you think, if I'd made that big an error, it might have come to light before now. But...
Yeah. And there is a point of being sensitive. I think, and it's something that you worry about. I worry about this. I had someone recently, actually, because I've just written a book set in Istanbul. And I was talking to someone about whether it is appropriate to call Turkish people Turks and whether that's offensive or not. And I decided in the end that I wouldn't, because whilst I don't think it's offensive, I don't know what it will be like in 10 years. Will that be something that in 5 or 10 years changes or whatever? So in the end, I thought, play it safe. I'm not going to do it,
Sometimes you deliberately want a character to be offensive because it's not that the author is every character. Sometimes a character has to be a complete dick in order to come across the right way, because there are racist people. I mean, that's just a given. And sometimes they're going to be criminals. In fact, I'd say criminals are more likely to be racist than everyone else. And so sometimes you deliberately want to be offensive in order to paint them in an accurate light.
Yeah, I thought this the other day. I thought that another example of this, which I thought was a bit bonkers. I quite like reading reviews, not necessarily on my books, but on other people's books, because I find them very amusing. Yeah, and I read this one review of it's a real top-selling book. It was I can't remember who it was by, but it was really, really top-selling. And it said there was a reviewer there, and it had about 1,000 people had said it was helpful. On Amazon, you can say it's helpful. Yeah. And it said, I will not read this book because someone in it kills a dog.
Yeah, that one does seem to be a trigger point for people.
And I thought, well, obviously I don't want to kill dogs. Dogs are very nice and I like dogs. But it's a book. No actual dogs are harmed in the making of this book.
I've got a few, especially in the US, where people say the author drops the F-bomb and you're like, you can't say, it's a murder story. People are killing each other. And this guy's getting thrown in the Thames with concrete blocks attached to their ankles. People getting whacked with everything under the sun, stabbed, shot, insulin injected into them while they're running. All these different murder methods. And the thing that you're annoyed is I swore. It's just disproportionate.
It's funny, isn't it? The sensitivity of it. But anyway, it's amuses me some of the things that people say. But you're right. It goes out to being a minority, and I think you sort of think generally we're writing stories that are entertaining, true to what we believe, and true to life as we understand it. And I suppose with the intention of you've got to think about the intention, haven't you? The intention is for them to be entertaining, not to be offensive. And
well, exactly. And the problem is once you start selling a certain number, and I'm not sure where it is, but once you get into the thousands, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, eventually you're going to come across people who think whatever you've written, no matter how you've written it, is wrong. Either you're being too sensitive, too PC, you're swearing too much, you've got too much violence, too little violence. And I think it's about having the right book for the right reader. I mean, if you want something that's ridiculously PC and very simple, you probably don't want crime, especially not the thriller end of the market. You probably want a cozy crime. Pick up Agatha Raisin and go and enjoy yourself. Great, if that's your bag. But I thought you'd hope that covers will help signify it. Like I can see your cover in the background there, and immediately I know what you write. It's not difficult, is it? And readers can use that as a quick tell-all to, yep, that's a crime thriller. It's international. It's right there in the title. Shadowed man on the cover. That's for me.
That's it. That's the beauty of what we sort of produce and sort of how that fits into a box, isn't it? So let's talk then. If you were to, your books so far have followed a couple of the DCI that you mentioned, and now you're going on to the sort of spin-off of these particular gang members. Do you think you'll always write in that sort of gritty genre that you currently do, or do you think, I've spoken to people on this show that are like, oh, I also have got 10 books out that are science fiction, I've also got another 5 books that are this or that, people just tend to chop and change, don't they?
I quite like the idea of doing something different, but I'll do it under a pen name because I don't want to muddy the waters. I want readers to know when they buy the ones with Sean Campbell on it that they're getting the Sean Campbell experience. I did do a co-authored novel last year, The Grifter, and that one is a bit softer. It's a bit different. In that one, we've got a homeless guy who is on the streets having lost every penny in a scam, in a Ponzi scheme. And conversely, the other perspective, because it's an alternating chapters story, is the billionaire who is running the Ponzi scheme and trying to keep it going, because the inevitability of a Ponzi scheme is at some point it's probably going to get too big to fail. It is possible to run a Ponzi scheme almost indefinitely, as Madoff showed that for decades you can get away with it. And I want to show how that's really a sort of a problem of the same issue of money, but on a completely different scale. So you've got the homeless guy who literally hasn't got enough to eat. And we start with him basically struggling to find some shelter, find food, find warmth, versus the guy who is spending millions on his lovely home. He's got a skyscraper with his name on the side of it. And so for that one, we took Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we put the victim, who is our sort of perpetrator slash nice guy protagonist, who is just homeless, at the bottom and trying to climb Maslow's hierarchy and going up throughout the story. And conversely, we start with the bad guy, the fraudster, at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, trying to sort of maintain it and keep it going, and inevitably sliding. And so the crossover is quite interesting. And that one didn't need as much violence as a thriller, but it's a financial thriller, despite the fact that finance is quite complicated, and some people hate the high finance element. But a Ponzi scheme is, I think, really quite fascinating, because you do have to keep pumping money in order to rob Peter to pay Paul over and over and over again. And you can see how that quickly exponentializes, that you've got one victim, then you need 2 people to pay that down, then 4, then 8, then 16, and suddenly the pyramid is enormous. And you can see the pressure on a criminal to keep that going, and trying to keep this perspective that he's a respectable financier, and he's using the ill-gotten gains to buy prestige and try and get his way into high society. And then you contrast that with the guy who is trying to scrape together Oyster card deposits to send them back at the train station to get £2.50 each so he can buy a bacon sarnie. And I think having those two extremes is really interesting. It's not anything like the DCI Morton series, but you can do something that's still vaguely connected.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, but it's in the same world, isn't it? They could meet in some way at some crossroads. Yeah, I don't know quite how, but it could. Alison says she really enjoyed The Grifter and asks if you're planning to write any more with Ali, who I assume is your
I am indeed
co-writer there. Tell us about that.
We've got another one on the go at the moment. So the one we're talking about at the moment is The Psychopath Within, which is a story that sort of blends multiple genres again. And this one is a historical crime is committed within the legal profession, and then modern day judges end up turning up dead. And why? And the perspective includes a psychopath who is adopted by a lovely couple and then goes on to become a lawyer. Definitely not autobiographical.
How is the process different for writing a book that sort of steps away from the series then? Because I know from my series, it's quite easy to, well, not easy is the wrong word, but you've got the characters, you just come up with another thing, don't you, to put on them.
You can take your characters and go, well, what case are they doing this week? Where's the body?
Yeah, that's right.
Why they do it? I mean, you ask the same questions and come up with almost a framework. And that can mean that you've got a very repetitive thing if you do it wrong, or it could mean you've got a nice structure that you can extrapolate and franchise basically and repeat. The one-offs, I think, take a lot more work, because you've got to take all of the concepts and develop all of the characters and everything for every book, and you can't recycle it as much. There's no, we're going to follow the police manual here, and we're going to secure the crime scene, we're going to interview the immediate witnesses, we're going to try and build the timeline, we'll do the forensics. We've got, we know that tests for gunshot residue will take 72 hours to come back. DNA we can rush in an hour if we pay for it. All the stuff that is real life inspired. If you start and do something that's really different and hasn't been done before, basically going massively off piste, you have to make so much extra up to compensate for that vacuum, and it just takes a lot more imagination, and you can get it really wrong, because if you get the details wrong, it's not very convincing. You end up rewriting massive swathes of the book, so the editing has to be on point, otherwise it just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean that's always the case, isn't it? I've found the more I've planned, the less I've had to sort of rewrite later on. I mean, but you said earlier that you know the end point. It's just that sort of middle that you're matching together, right?
Yeah,
but you don't always.
Not always. I mean, it works better if you do. I mean, sometimes when you write it without an end point, you don't know what you're doing. You write it so that any of the suspects could be the killer until the last minute. And the problem with that is it means you can't solve it, because the information is not there until you've added it at chapter 50, and suddenly it's not fair on the reader because they can't work it out. So sometimes for that, you'll have to go back and reread it and be like, right, well, I need to make a more firm decision that points towards character A here, make sure the red herring is more concrete, in order to make it a fair experience. And again, that's got editorial challenges, that you want to make sure it's challenging enough that not everyone works it out, but not so hard that nobody works it out. There's a balance to be had between the two.
Yeah, there's got to, and you don't want it to be obvious, as you say. It needs to be somewhere between the two, you know.
Only to maybe get why they did it, but not who, or who did it, but not why. You know, if you get a bit of a solution, you feel that I've been fair with you, but at the same time, it's sufficiently surprising. And reframing it at the end is always good.
And your books are set in London, near where you live.
Yeah, exactly. I've set them all in places I've lived for the most part, or at least I've been to. So I've been there, I've taken photographs, I've sat on benches and listened to people to try and get the accents right for that area, to try and make sure that ethnically it fits, that the people I'm describing are people that could conceivably live there. I mean, Cleaver Square, which is my second one, that's a really nice little tiny sort of street in Kennington. So it's really nice. You come off and there's a pub and there's lovely townhouses and it's ridiculously posh. But if you go like, a couple of 100 yards outside of Cleaver Square, it gets to, Stabbyville quite quickly in the wrong places. And I love that part of London, that you just have extremes next to each other. You've got council houses next to millionaires, and you need to go and have a look, and you need to sort of walk down those streets and go, what is that one about? Like for the last book I did, The Grifter, I walked around Kensington and looked at some of the houses, and in the gardens you can see glass in the grass, and you're like, what's that? And it turns out that most people there, because the house is so expensive, excavate down a floor or two, and then they put skylights that are in the garden. So that little bit that there's glass there gives rise to the fact that there's going to be another floor underneath. So if you're robbing that place and you've got setting a murder there, suddenly you've got this do they go up, do they go down? And so people who've read The Grifter will know in the ending there's people who could go up the stairs 2 stories, or he could go downstairs. And they would know that I've looked at some of the architectural plans and seen that people have put gyms in those places. They put swimming pools, they put safe rooms. And then, of course, if someone's got a safe room, that's quite an interesting concept. What do they do with that? How do you miss it in the storyline?
That is, isn't it? That is. I'd love that in cities, particularly that sort of a duality of the very rich and the very poor. And I think in London it's quite obvious, isn't it? As you say, you somewhere like Islington or whatever, you walk 2 streets down and it's tower blocks that rear up ahead of you made out of concrete, you know what I mean? And then you go further 2 streets further and it's beautiful sort of Edwardian houses, you know.
Yeah, and there's a bit of sort of an east-west divide as well, isn't there? You've got a lot of low-rise stuff in the west. East London, I mean, I've lived in East London before, and you look at a huge amount of new build going on and you just see flats going up. I mean, all of the Olympic stuff, you've got flat block after flat block, and regeneration that's displaced people, and where do those people go? And you can weave some of the social fabric of London into the story, that London is so disproportionately expensive, so go buy my books. But people who live in London need to afford it. And
you need to be buying them. You need to be selling them.
I went to the bakery last week, and someone wanted £4.55 for a croissant. Come on, I need more books.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That's it.
It's interesting.
Talking about that, then, are your books at all inspired by? You talk there about social issues that are happening within London, which there are many. How are your books inspired by sort of events that occur, and do you put those events in the book? Do you say, this this happened, so this is, or do you sort of allude to it, or do you just ignore it completely?
Be in a bit of a vacuum. I mean, I want to be cognizant of things like Grenfell and all the housing issues, Windrush, people being deported. But I don't want to be too close to the bone. I mean, it's supposed to be entertainment rather than a factual account of London. But at the same time, I'd like to be reasonably cognizant of, if you've got a poor character who's living in a nice house that's right next to a development, watching the development creep ever closer and seeing there's compulsory purchase orders going up on this low-rise housing, and someone might have to move, and that'd be quite an interesting angle to look at. Or you might look at the way in which there are, as we said, the ghettos of extreme council estates right next to the really nice parts of the world. Like there's the World End estate in Chelsea, which is notoriously one of the roughest council estates in London, and yet it's right next to the King's Road and all the really nice stuff. And it's so close together that you've got this juxtaposition of people who are crowding on buses to come in 6 zones to clean their houses in one place, and other people who are struggling by. And I find it fascinating because it is. I mean, the whole idea of where you should be and whether you deserve to be in a social ladder and whether you should be in a nice house or not, and when people bought, you've got this idea that nowadays, if you want to buy a house in London, you probably need to be a banker or a lawyer in order to afford it. Because, I mean, houses near here are £1 million for a terrace house that is broadly a 2 up, 2 down that was probably 50k in '99. And you're like, well, who's buying it? Because you see for sale and sold signs walking around all the time. And you think, well, hang on, if you bought a £1 million house, you need a mortgage of 800k on a 20% down. Who saved up £200,000? How have they got
mad, isn't it?
£800,000? Because it's not people our age, is it?
No, that's it. That's crazy.
A huge pile of money. You just can't do it. I mean, at some point, I almost certainly have to leave London because it's not reasonable. And you just sort of see that where people come in their 20s, they get degrees in London, they take their first graduate job, they struggle. You see people sharing 6 rooms to a house. And then in their 20s, late 20s, early 30s, they get married, they have kids, and they move out. And that forms part of the London structure. And when you're writing a crime novel, you need to be cognizant of who's in an area. Because if you write about Ilford, you're not going to be writing about millionaires. And you want to make sure that what you're saying reflects that area at the time and how it's changing. And sometimes you have older people who are more working class than an area might suggest, who've been there forever and a day because they bought when they could afford it. But they wouldn't be new buyers moving in now.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that makes that's interesting in any sort of story that you tell. And I remember talking to Jake Needham a little while ago, who wrote a story set in Bangkok 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and we talked about how much Bangkok has changed in that time because he lives there now. But he said, and we talked about how this novel has become like a time capsule for the city of that generation, of that era 20 years ago, because it is so different now. And I think that's an interesting idea that we have as writers, because we're not just telling the story, but we're actually sort of we're creating that place as it was when we saw it at that time.
I feel like the place you set your novel is almost an extra character and should lend a lot to the story. It shouldn't be that you could pick up your story and drop it in another city, because if that happens, it's not sufficiently attached to the surroundings. Because what happens in London is not what happens in Glasgow. You're not going to have the same social fabric. You're not going to have the same crimes.
I mean, there would be crossovers, of course,
police.
and
Exactly.
there'll be similarities between London and New York and LA and Mumbai and Sydney.
Some details
but yes, absolutely, and the same sort of social issues. The same.
One
sort
of the things I love about
movement of
London
people
is that you've got that blend of old and new, and it's not just the people that are old and new and moving, but you go to a churchyard that's been there for hundreds of years, and you've got these crumbling remains with a lovely garden in it, and then right next door you've got skyscrapers, and you can walk 5 feet and see that, and then go another 20 feet the other way, and you've got low-rise housing, or you've got this little courtyard square, or a tiny alleyway where there's loads of booksellers in West London, and you just find little gems that reflect the past. But one of the things about London that people don't realise is how many rivers there once were, and obviously Rivers of London by Abramovich has sort of unearthed that a bit for some people. But the amount that you've got the River Fleet that just disappears because we've concreted over it. And then you've got all these Victorian sewers that are not used around King's Cross. I mean, that's another interesting one, which I use as a plot point, that the old sewage system there links straight up into the bathrooms of some very nice townhouses. And so one of the ideas I had for a murder was, if you went into those sewers, which are locked, but you can break the lock quite easily, I imagine. I haven't done it, honestly. And put a load of dry ice down there and cause CO2 to go up through the toilet pipes into the bathroom. If you could do that, you could theoretically deprive someone of oxygen through the plumbing from underneath. So you could murder someone in a very nice
without
building
even being there.
without them ever being there. So if you can do that sort of thing, it makes it interesting because you're anchoring it in the place because nowhere else has got these old Victorian plumbing systems. It won't work with the modern plumbing system, but at the same time, it's an interesting way to kill someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those sorts of things, there's these sorts of structures and historical elements that you cling onto in a place. Like in my book Istanbul that I've just finished and is out in a couple of weeks, I talk about the cisterns and the old underground waterways that they have there, and some of the old structures that they have, and that they are a backdrop to the story, and that's an interesting part of it.
It's also the general noise of the city, isn't it? In the countryside, if someone came to your house in the middle of the night, you're going to hear them. You know, a car parking in the middle of a country lane is an anomaly. Whereas in London, hearing trains go past constantly, hearing police helicopters buzz overhead, because they're a couple of miles away looking around Tottenham trying to find someone who's running through Lordship Lane with a knife. It's part of the fabric of London, and it's just really interesting. And it means that people do pay less attention to everyone else on the street. They do walk faster. They do put headphones on and just walk past. And you've got that bystander effect of, even if there is a victim, people will walk past thinking they're drunk or they're passed out rather than they've been stabbed. And you wouldn't get that in a tiny country village.
Yeah, and they don't know who that person is. As you say, in a village you would. Oh, that's Keith. He's always doing that. Yeah, that's it. Ray asks an interesting question that I was going to ask you, actually. The crime DCI thrillers, murder genre that you write seem to be quite British because you talk about the places, you talk about the structures within the British police. How successful are your books internationally?
Well, they've been top 100 in Australia, Canada, the US, Kindle All-Star Awards in multiple countries. So
wow,
reasonably
pretty good
successful.
Then. Yeah.
We're talking millions of downloads rather than hundreds of thousands. So I've been quite happy with it. The UK is a large chunk of my distribution, but at the same time, I've had months where Canada and Australia have been thousands of pounds rather than hundreds of pounds, which is quite nice. It does sort of vary. It seems to me that it's very extreme these days. You're either very, very successful, very not. And most of my successful months have been when I've had a book bub and suddenly it's gone mad internationally. So I think it's where you concentrate your marketing efforts as much as anything else. The Americans will often find that British spelling's a bit weird, but people are often fascinated with international stories. I mean, you're writing Kathmandu and the like, and you don't have to live in Kathmandu, otherwise your market would be absolutely tiny.
Exactly, yeah.
So as long as it's interesting, it's relatable. I mean, the human experience is the same the world over. You can get past the technicalities. They don't have to be the front and center. I want them to be accurate enough that if you know what I'm talking about, I'm right. Yeah. But at the same time, I don't want it to be a barrier to enjoying what is basically an interesting thriller.
And I suppose solving crime is a language that is universal because the tools are arguably similar in all countries. The processes, whilst there will be different idiosyncrasies between one and the other, they're essentially tried in a similar sort of way, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. Especially in all the places where you've got readily available forensic services, it's going to be pretty similar. You look at the success of something like CSI in Britain,
24. I love those programs, and I know hundreds of people that did.
Hundreds of us will have a convention.
That's it. We'll all go.
The early CSI is push, jump, fell. The person going out a window. Were they pushed? Did they jump? Did they fall? And the simple geometry of how far you travel based on the height relative to the ground. I mean, those sort of details are universal. I mean, that doesn't take much to do. And I've used that one detail before. And the idea of defenestration, auto defenestration, and how people go out a window, how far they go, how much weight you need to be pushed them out a window, how much strength you need, what height you need to be, how much leverage there need to be between the killer and the victim. All that stuff is universal to humanity. It's not specific to Britain. The investigation is the way that the police structure is, but ultimately, murderer, policeman, it's very much cat and mouse that we can all relate to.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. That's reassuring. Do you make an effort to sort of not use the acronyms or explain what the acronyms are in the book? So someone's never heard DCI or whatever.
Well, I like having the sort of ultra regional stuff and the ultra specific stuff, but it needs to be explained. And sometimes you need a character who's a bit thick. just to be there as a proxy for, I want to ask some questions.
Yeah, I see. I mean,
it's a lazy
it's this.
as an author, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't want someone explaining something to someone who already knows. As you know, Bob.
That's why Watson is in the Sherlock books, isn't he? Like he wouldn't be there if we were all on the same intellect as Sherlock Holmes, you know. Oh, come on, Watson, keep up. It's because such and such. Oh, right, got you.
Even if you hide it a bit, you put it in a report, or you put it in a communication to a superior. You know, we need SO22. Who knows what SO22 is? Well, if you don't, I need to explain it. Or you might not know that a senior crime officer is the old term for a CSI. You might not know how quickly things can work. You might not know about pace time limits. I mean, that's something that most people won't care about.
I wouldn't know that.
Who's needed to authorise detention. And yet, if you explain it, suddenly what sounds like a really boring bit of technicality becomes a ticking clock. The police have got 24 hours, and then they need to get a sergeant to authorise so they can have 36. You know, and suddenly you've got this ticking time bomb to the people we think are murderers are going to get released. And at that point, they can go and destroy evidence. And you take a really boring bit of correct procedure and you flip it and turn it into something interesting.
Yeah, so they've got to find the thing to get them before that time. You know,
bomb. It's about knowing the bomb is under the table. You know, there's that classic example of someone's on the phone having a chit chat and doesn't know anything. Boring. Someone is having a chit chat and is having a boring conversation, but you know there's a bomb under the table that's about to explode. Suddenly, the mundane becomes interesting. And so it's about putting that bomb in the story so that you care. So there's stakes, so things are going to happen. So someone's going to get hurt, going to get killed. Someone's going to lose money. Someone's going to gain. You know, some way or other, there's got to be tension. Blake Snyder, who wrote Save the Cat as a screenwriter, famously said that you need tension in every scene. There's got to be someone who wants something and someone who's not getting it. And the story's got to either put them closer towards getting it or take them further away. And if you do that on every page, it turns your book into a page turner because you want to find out what happens next. And then you race to the end. And then the author gets a load of pages read and is very happy indeed.
Absolutely. 100%. That's what we need. Sean, this has been fantastic. A couple of things. Firstly, what book would you recommend people start with you? You know, you mentioned the first one, but you said it was my first effort. You know, what would you recommend?
The Evolution of a Serial Killer, because it's one of my favourites, and it's quite multi-layered. It's got a clever hook. If you don't like that one, you probably won't like the rest. So
yeah, well, that's it, and that's okay because lots of people do. So we're not bothered, you know. And that's the way it is.
Wait until I give one way for free and try that one because that's always the low risk way of doing it.
Absolutely, that is always a good way to do it. Yeah, but where can people find you then online and sign up to your mailing list and DCI Morton? I like that. I like how your website is the name of the character rather than you.
I couldn't get my name. I wanted it, but
oh right, there's another Sean. Damn you, Sean.
Exactly,
Campbell.
There is. I don't care if you're a world famous Potter. I want the name.
Yeah,
my name's too, man.
That's it. Well, maybe when you do that pen name, you know, for Cozy Mysteries or whatever,
you can have really strong branding because you can have everything themed and make it beautiful from the off.
That's it. And even have the Instagram handle. Yeah. Sean, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've loved talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
And ladies and gents at home, thanks for tuning in to Books and Beer. It's been brilliant. I'm back next week. However, it's going to be at a different time. We're going to do it on Tuesday at 5 p.m. rather than Wednesday at 5 p.m. because I'm going to see Steve Moore and we're going to be doing the first ever Books and Beer in the same room together, drinking beer. Yeah, it's the what should have always happened, you know. Two blokes in a room drinking beer, talking about books. What's not to like? So yeah, we'll be there, and it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Sean, thank you again. Stay in touch, and let's connect again when you put your next book out or something for sure.
Cheers. Do come down to London.
Cheers. Absolutely.